and then I will ask our very talented graduate fellow to introduce our presenter. Welcome to the Road to Recovery's first webinar in 2025, and a happy new year to all of you, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Paul Schmidt. I'm the Executive Director for Road to Recovery, and I suspect many of you are very familiar with us and what we've been doing, and we are glad that you're joining us today. And in particular, today we're exploring the use and the value of one of the resources that we created, and Tom Will in particular is to be credited for the development of what we call the Species Recovery Progress Wheel. And we are very much looking forward to hearing Tom and how it might benefit the work of other species working groups who may not have used it to date. And of course, look at the value of it for our overall effort in recovering species under the R2R banner. We think it has great value for the future, and both at an individual team level, but also at a more holistic, grander level. So stay tuned for hearing about that in the coming webinar today. And as a reminder, we are recording this for our use and putting it up on our website so that all can take advantage of that in the future. And it's also being translated into Spanish. And in the chat, you will see some instructions if you would like to take advantage of the Spanish translation and how to activate that for yourself. With no further ado, I'll turn it over to Quinn Carvey, our graduate fellow for Road to Recovery. Quinn?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's my pleasure today to introduce the speaker. Tom Will earned his PhD from the University of Michigan on the behavioral ecology of blue-winged and golden-winged warblers. Tom is an English literature teacher, Wall Street broker, newspaper columnist, and iterant biology teacher. Tom spent 20 years in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a PIF migratory bird biologist in the upper Midwest, retired and joined the R2R core team and is now a global traveler. Thank you, Tom, and I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Quinn. I was wondering how you're going to handle my itinerant career. Those things that I've done are not simultaneous. They were sequential. So I graduated from Wall Street, a very toxic environment, and then was very pleased to pursue a career in biology, more or less, and teaching as well. So thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here. Obviously, Road to Recovery is near and dear to my heart. And I actually didn't start with my first slides, so let me stop sharing and go back. Oh, I can do that this way. Apologize for that. The bulk of this talk really began with a presentation at the American Ornithological Society meeting in this fall. And I have to acknowledge that Paul Schmidt and Katie Holland were helped to contribute to this basic talk. Briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the R2R goals in context. And that's for people who may not be totally familiar with R2R, which probably is very few of you. And then some of the tools that the Road to Recovery group has developed, including species working group progress wheel, or the species working group progress tool. And I'll refer to that as the wheel in the talk. I'll talk about the purpose and structure of this tool, and then an experience that one of our working groups had in using this, which is the Western Yellow-billed Cuckoo Working Group. Talk a little bit about that and how they use the wheel. and then how the wheel criteria can be used to guide adaptive research and co-production. Talk a little bit about sustainability of working group programs, and then maybe future directions for the wheel. And there'll be an opportunity for folks to ask questions and to have some discussion at the end, I hope. Briefly, these are the Road to Recovery goals, and the two that I'm going to focus on mostly are the purposeful integration of biological and social science and the co-production of sustainable solutions, even though all the goals are relevant to the tools that we've developed. And again, particularly when we develop tools, these tools are really for the purpose of engaging and empowering species working groups like the Yellow-billed Cuckoo Working Group and others. We strive to create these tools and engagement opportunities to grow knowledge and capacity for working groups, and all those really involved in bird conservation, and to provide, ultimately, we hope to provide innovative and sustainable funding for species recovery and species recovering working groups. That's a goal of our road to recovery. I want to point out that though I'll be focusing on the wheel, there really are multiple tools that are available for working groups. They're all on the Road to Recovery website. We've had 4 3-day workshops. We've had 10 engagement sessions. We've had 13 different species working group webinars, and we've produced 2 guidance documents. And all of these materials are available on the website. And so therefore, please, I always like to stress that it's not all about the wheel. There's so much material that we've developed in the workshops and in these various documents, and they're all available on the Road to Recovery website, r2rbirds.org. Also, even though the wheel is a product, it comes out of a single product. It comes out of a tremendous amount of development of databases for information about all the species in the tipping point list, as well as an analysis that we did of what knowledge we have about various species in the that are tipping point species. And so all this material put together is what stands behind this wheel tool, which I'm going to try to describe. And all that material has been coalesced into 90 different criteria. Those 90 criteria are organized into 6 different action areas. And those action areas are familiar to all of you who've been involved in conservation, organizing a group, for figuring out what the biology is that's necessary for recovery, trying to evaluate conservation challenges on the landscape, figuring out how to address those conservation challenges through implementation, and then looking at monitoring and evaluation. So that's a typical sort of sequence. Those 6 different areas are then divided into 3 segments, and each of those have 5 different levels of activity that the R2R group has decided would be an appropriate sequence proceeding from 1 to 5. So in this example of looking at these criteria for organizing a recovery network, one begins with just having a core team that coalesces around bird species, or maybe even a multi-species group, define leadership, look at the human dimensions and biological experts who should be invited to the partnership, providing attention to diversity and inclusivity in the core team and supporting teams, and finally developing an organizational plan and clear rules of engagement. So you see there's sort of a progression from 1 through 5 in each one of the subcategories under each one of the 6 main categories that are organized into the wheel. And this is what the wheel looks like, and it's adapted. I didn't necessarily create this entire structure. It's adapted from and let's see if I can move this out of the way so I can read my own slide. It's adapted from the Society for Ecological Restoration's 5-star recovery wheel. So we took that, and it was Hero Walker, one of the members of the yellow-billed cuckoo species working group, who suggested we use this. So basically, we took that structure and divided it up, as I communicated earlier, into these 6 categories that were more relevant for Road to Recovery. One of the core aspects of the species recovery wheel is that it incorporates not just biological components or biological criteria, but also incorporates social science and human dimensions criteria. And so you can see in the colored in wheel those individual segments and criteria that are either require social science knowledge or for which social science knowledge would be especially important or relevant. Here's an example of one of those criteria. After a biological assessment of focus areas, then social science would help us by developing a network analysis that would suggest partnerships that might be most promising for leveraging conservation action. And these might not always be bird oriented. They may maybe things like water resources, reforestation groups, things like that. So not just the biological assessment is important, but also would we be working in areas where our network analysis suggests that the partnerships that would be most beneficial for us to engage. So as a combination of 2 things would be part of the construction of an area that would be good for focusing on for species recovery. In addition, and this is in response to one of our engagement sessions, we really feel strongly about incorporating inclusivity and knowledge from the global South, local knowledge, traditional knowledge. And you can see in this example that the particular criteria of the wheel that are relevant for addressing inclusivity are highlighted in blue here. So a good number of criteria really do are designed to help species working groups achieve this inclusivity and attention to gray literature or local knowledge that might not be a part of the standard scientific publications in North America. For example, one of the criteria, 3.3.2, is to encourage groups to make a thorough attempt to include published literature in the Global South, unpublished reports, and especially insights from scientists who work in focus areas where that knowledge may be contained verbally or in other means, particularly in indigenous areas that may be very important. And then conversations, criteria 3.3.4, conversations with community individuals results in inclusion of this local knowledge and indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. So those 2 criteria are examples of how we would encourage species working groups to incorporate knowledge that's outside of the norm of North American literature. I was really happy to work with and Katie Holland as well with the Western Yellow-billed Cuckoo Working Group, and they were one of the first groups to try out the wheel and see how it might help them. And this is the product that was developed. You can see, and it was partly because of the first effort we had with the Western Yellow-billed Working Group that we decided to include not just a dark blue color for achieving a particular criteria, but also a light blue color, which is sort of we're working on it. We haven't really sort of finished that goal, but we're on our way to do so. Maybe we're 50-50 on a particular criteria, and it was because of the yellow-billed species working group, yellow-billed cuckoo species working group, that we developed that sort of halfway point. So you can see in the work that in this case, the steering committee for Western Yellow-billed Cuckoo Working Group, they filled out the wheel, and this is the result of their work. The blue color, the light blue color being we're working on these particular criteria, the dark blue color, we've finished them. And I was particularly intrigued by this, and as with others in the designing of the wheel, in the sense that, well, this is interesting because there are dark blue colors toward the periphery. Maybe I forgot to mention that the 5 sequential categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, start with the interior of the circle and work out toward the edge. So criteria that are on the periphery are number 5. Criteria that are at the very center are number 1. And so I was surprised to see that some criteria were fulfilled at the level 5 by assessment of the working group, whereas criteria leading up to that weren't necessarily. We're still working on that. And I thought about that and I said, well, that's a good idea. In some cases, you don't necessarily need to complete every step to reach that sort of highest level of achievement within that particular segment of the wheel. That's okay. And on the other hand, maybe that it suggests that a conversation about what that level 5 really means might be important. So this is the work that the Western Yellow-billed Cuckoo Working Group did with the wheel. And when we initially thought about how species working groups would use the wheel, we thought, well, it would be great if a species working group had a meeting, especially a face-to-face meeting, sat down, looked at the criteria in the wheel, talked about them, and worked as a group to decide where we fit into that set of criteria. Have we achieved this? Have we not achieved this? What does it mean? What does it mean for us? To have that conversation with 90 criteria, of course, that's quite an endeavor. And so with the Western Yellow-billed Cuckoo Working Group, we tried one of those sessions initially, and the group decided, well, maybe it would be more helpful for individuals in the steering committee to do this assessment on their own. And I actually thought, well, that's a great idea. Have each member of the species work of the of the steering committee do an individual assessment. And so the working group in this case developed this spreadsheet, which is simply a list of the criteria, and then each member decided, well, are we working on this, but we haven't finished it? Number 1, have we conclusively achieved this particular criteria? So you could see everybody decided that the core team coalesces around bird species, in this case, yellow-billed cuckoo, and formed a working group. Yeah, we've done that, right across the board. But I was particularly interested in criteria where, for example, the ones that are highlighted in yellow here, where every member except for 1 decided that we haven't worked on this criteria at all, and yet one person decided that, no, we've finished that, we've done that. In this case, we did have an organizational and conservation work plan delineating necessary tasks. Yes, we did that. Other people felt that's not the case. And so I think it's particularly valuable for a working group to maybe do this independent assessment, but most importantly, to come back together again and have a discussion and look at these, particularly the criteria where there's a difference of opinion, and have a discussion around that. And it may be that the results of that discussion reveal, well, actually, I misunderstood the criteria, or the criteria itself is vague and I wasn't sure how to interpret it. Or, yeah, I think we've done that. And others say, no, I don't think we have, and then reach a decision. And in this case, you can see on the last column how the species working group resolved those differences and came up with either one for working on it or two, that particular criteria is achieved. I recognize, and I'm going to ask members of the Yellow-billed Cuckoo, Western Yellow-billed Cuckoo Working Group to engage in a little back and forth with me at this point in terms of what they thought about how this assessment worked and what some of their insights were in terms of using the wheel. And so I think Kira and Kathy and Jenna are on the call. I think Callie, another member of the steering committee, is working in the non-breeding season in Argentina now on yellow-billed cuckoo. So I just want to invite you folks to come on board and share your insights about how this all worked when you tried it out.
Who wants to go first?
Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, okay. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So I thought that the whole process was really beneficial for our group. And like Tom said, what we did was had committee members do it on their own and then come together. And the discussion I thought was really valuable. And our the biggest reason for discrepancy in scores was what was happening in Global South versus Global North. Because we tended to be further along with progress up here in the north. And then being able to kind of combine what's going on both on the breeding and the wintering grounds could be challenging.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah. I mean, when we designed this wheel, we realized that that was an issue, that things can be at different levels of progress in the breeding season and the non-breeding season, and even in the interim periods of migration. And how do we handle that? And so one way we decided to do that is that not just having the graphic representation of the wheel with the colors filled in, but also the spreadsheet itself, which has a column to capture differences of opinion or to capture a difference in where things are in the non-breeding season versus the breeding season. So currently, that's the way in which we resolve the issue that you described. But we're always thinking about ways that maybe the wheel could be improved to make that perhaps a little bit more clear, or another way to make that presentation. We're working between a trade-off of 90 really specific criteria and then a graphic way of displaying that's simple and direct enough that could be where that final product of the colored in wheel could be used to display progress and maybe show a grant application situation where you are in a particular progress toward recovery, and also what things need to be worked on next. Hira or Jenna, do you have anything to add to your experience in doing this?
I don't think Kira's on, but I guess I just wanted to chime in about how useful I thought it was that we sat down as a steering committee and had separate columns so we could each have our own opinion on it beforehand. And then when we met together, we discussed why there might be differences and discrepancies in numbers. And that really brought to light just some of our different perspectives on how we were meeting our goals, which I just found helpful for us to talk about in general. So that's the one piece.
What do you think, now that you've done this assessment, where do you think you'll take it? What's the next step in the working group for using the wheel?
We talked about, the steering committee anyway, talked about coming back to it maybe in a year or two and seeing what we have progressed on and what we haven't progressed on, but maybe wanted to. And then we're also discussing using it in grant proposals, as you suggested, to really nail down kind of this is an objective that that we want to achieve. And so it'll help us move along this R2R recovery progress wheel. So that's how we were thinking of using it and reassessing it in the future.
How would you decide which which part to work on next or where to focus? Does the wheel help clarify that, or?
I think it did help clarify where we might want to redirect focus, like where we were lacking, and also what we felt might be important. Um, but also, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, it also depends on what grants you can find and how well they fit into the objectives that you want to achieve. Um, so, for example, we recently put together a grant for the bird genoscape, and that's one of the progress levels that we were trying to achieve on the wheel. Hopefully, we'll get that. We'll see.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. I don't know, are there any other members of the working group that are on the call that want to make a comment at this point? I can't see the entire list right now.
I didn't happen to see anyone. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, this is
No.
Nick Beauregard. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo Kathy and Jenna and just say that I found it to be really helpful to do it separately, but also together, like on the call that we had. And it felt a little overwhelming to see this huge list at first, but then to kind of move through it all as a group and see where those discrepancies were that you pointed out and how maybe those are just different perspectives and we need to kind of figure out where we are all coming from was a really good exercise. So yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits and utility with this progress wheel.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. On this slide, I'm looking at this one particular criteria, which I thought was interesting. So about, well, 4 out of 7 folks thought, well, we're working on identifying socioeconomic drivers of threats. And several people said, no, we haven't done that at all. And yet the group finally decided that actually we haven't really even gotten a good start on that yet because the score is 0 as opposed to 1 or 2. So I think, those discussions, like you just sort of having that discussion of, well, what does this mean to identify a socioeconomic driver of a threat? And are we there or not, are really helpful. And it's our hope, of course, that would catalyze some additional conversation and maybe even a grant proposal to work on that aspect of conservation. I'd like to move on a little bit and talk about how co-production and the incorporation of social science can be derived from looking at the wheel. Here you see a segment of the wheel which deals with focus areas, and those 3, 4, and 5 criteria are develop partnering opportunities to in focus areas to actually contact key partners and bring them on board, and then to take the biological focus areas and refine them by including the human landscape assessment that comes out of the achieving the 3rd and 4th criteria. So looking at those criteria might help a group think about, well, how do we do these things, and even how might we design work to do in this case in the non-breeding season. So the challenge was here in Argentina that landscape protection is no longer provided by the national government in Argentina, and so but the creation and maintenance of corridors is essential for wildlife conservation generally and for yellow-billed cuckoos specifically. And obviously there may not be enough land available for purchase to support these corridors. So the biological question then is, what lands are cuckoos using, and when are they present, and how much more land is needed to support population recovery? It's a very biological question. And a human dimensions question is, well, okay, what is the feasibility of restoration and conservation on private lands that fall within that desired corridor? And so the proposed approach is, well, first let's address that biological concern. Let's do an ecological landscape analysis, use GIS to prioritize areas for corridor expansion and look for where the prime habitat expansion should be. These are photos from yellow-billed cuckoo habitat in Argentina. And then the next step would be to look at to make partners with various groups that are working on conservation and particularly bird conservation in Argentina, and develop a strategy through expert elicitation to figure out where private lands restoration is viable, what the social context would be, what land is available for purchase, and what priorities landowners may have that may be competing with conservation goals so that it can be addressed. So the expert elicitation provides additional information that would be useful in determining where these key areas to work might be, in addition to just the biological assessment. So this is an example from where yellow-billed cuckoos need conservation action in Argentina. Another example, this is looking at limiting factors or identifying challenges on the landscape. I'm highlighting 3 of the criteria, 2, 3, and 4 in that threat assessment part of the wheel, which we call challenges now, where we're looking for limiting factors. And what is the intersection between species ecology and threats? Have you explored that as a working group? What socioeconomic factors would be relevant for addressing those limiting factors? So to do a socioeconomic analysis of hypothetical limiting factors. And then, is local or traditional ecological knowledge included in that assessment? Those are the criteria for this part of the wheel. How might they? So the conservation challenge is private land in Paraguay. Now, private landowners are legally required to set aside a proportion of their land as intact forest. So the situation is very different in Paraguay than in Argentina. Now, the private landowners, though they're required to set aside a proportion of their land, can do this in whatever way they want. So the biological question then is, does the arrangement of forest patches on agricultural land impact usability for cuckoos or not? And then the human dimensions question is, well, what factors influence a landowner's decision to arrange the mandated forest in a particular way? Why, if the landowner can conserve this forest in any way he or she wants, what factors influence those decisions, and how receptive are landowners to incentives to change the arrangement if it's necessary to do so? So the proposed approach is, well, let's look at the biology. What landscape configuration works for cuckoos? What's the fetch size requirements on the non-breeding season for cuckoos? How is density and survival in forest fragments, and how is local movement affect survival? So these are all biological questions, in which case cuckoos can be captured and radio tagged and their movements tracked to see where cuckoos are actually spending a lot of their time. What kind of situation really works well? The social science part of this proposed research is to meet with the landowners, do interviews with them, see what their challenges are, what are the motivations that they have for designing different forest patch sizes, and what is their receptiveness to change, and what are the incentives for strategies. And I think this is a particularly great example because not only are you working with landowners and trying to find out what decisions they make, while at the same time you're doing the biological assessment, and those two can actually be combined so that landowners may even be encouraged to take part, or at least listen to the results of the biological assessment and become partners and get interested in yellow-billed cuckoos. And at the same time, you're developing a set of relationships with the landowners that hopefully will persist beyond the project and also provide opportunities for education. So here you see a group of landowners discussing in the field how this might work, both incorporating biology and social science, and developing a set of relationships that will persist hopefully into the future. So with Katie Holland's help and with Callie's input, we developed these examples of how criteria in the wheel might help to spark a little bit of creativity in designing or a co-production type project where both social science and biological science are worked on at the same time. The great thing about that is there's efficiency in this system rather than only figuring out what sort of patches the birds use and what sort of landscape configuration would be useful. At the same time, you're looking at the feasibility of actually implementing conservation action, because at the same time you're understanding the constraints that farmers may feel in how they design their landscape. I want to point out finally that sustainability is really an important part of our idea of working in working groups on species to recover them. I think we all realize that to reach a recovery goal in the present doesn't necessarily mean that recovery will be persistent into the future. And so figuring out how to sustain that recovery is really critical. And several elements in the wheel address that issue by focusing on, well, what is happening that would help to sustain conservation action for a particular species. And so it's really important to address those issues. Here's the yellow-billed cuckoo wheel again, and you see that they've actually looked at those sustainability factors and are working on them simultaneous with the biological factors. It may also be necessary to repeat going through the wheel once you reach a certain point. And we encourage people to do adaptive research. So not wait until everything is known about the species before implementation or conservation action takes place, but to incorporate conservation action while you're as a way of identifying limiting factors. So to be able to do both of those things at the same time and learn whether or not a particular conservation action benefits or changes what a perceived hypothetical limiting factor is really important. And therefore, it may be necessary to engage in an iterative process and rethink some of the criteria that we breeze through initially, and particularly the biological assessment parts. And so going through the wheel a number of times may be really important. And I think that ultimately the sustainability of our actions is really dependent on the partnerships we build, and particularly the partnerships that result in building conservation action partners in the next generation. And so I think the example from Paraguay is really relevant, because when one works with farmers to figure out what their constraints are, at the same time that one does biological research, it's a marvelous opportunity to actually engage the next generation. So simply contacting a group that works with young folks in conservation in that area and bringing them into the same landscape where the research is going on, and talking about yellow cuckoos is really important in building that next set of conservation actors. Well, that's all I have, and I'd like to open it up for questions right now if there are any, and have a little discussion.
Awesome. Thanks so much for an amazing talk, Tom. It's so cool to see the wheel in action and actually being used and adapted, and I'm curious to see how it goes in the future as well. So we are opening up the floor to questions. You can either post them in the chat or feel free to raise your hand and ask your question live. We do have some comments in the chat asking if you have the links or access to the Reimagining the Grand Chaco document and the How to Draw a Cuckoo document. So if you have those.
I don't know. I'll ask a species working group member that question.
And it looks like we have a question from Steve. Steve, go ahead.
Hi, Tom and Quinn. Thanks, Tom, for the presentation. So my question is for the members of the working group that went through this. And what I'm wondering is, coming out of the discussion, were there any things that were identified as, gee, that's something we've really been overlooking this whole time as we've just been focused elsewhere? And so in response to completing the wheel exercise, there's actually been sort of a shift in priority or focus of the overall working group to address something that had been falling through the cracks.
Kathy and
I think Kathy kind of touched on it, but just really realizing, I mean, I guess we kind of already knew, but realizing that we needed to try to focus more on the non-breeding grounds and building and creating collaborations and relationships there, trying to promote projects that do that, trying to gain additional members that could help us with that. And yeah, and then also you can see the limiting factors one is very lacking. And I guess we kind of felt like, wow, we really do need to figure out these limiting factors if we can try to pin that down.
Yeah, Paul, you've got a question? Go ahead.
I do. And Tom, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about your vision on how this tool could be more useful in the grander scheme of our work in Road to Recovery, since you're sort of the creator or inventor of it.
yeah, good question, Paul. I mean, I have, I think about that in several different levels. Having been a teacher and having really a commitment to the idea of discussion and communication, I think if the wheel itself and if going through these criteria can encourage conversation um, and and have people think about things that they haven't really thought about, or have them think about things, that they've thought about but haven't thought about it completely or in a different way, then it has achieved a really tangible benefit. We also think that it would be great in the end to have more species working groups work through the wheel, that we would get more comments on what's useful, what's not useful, and therefore that gives us a way to make revisions to the criteria if necessary. Also, it would give us the opportunity to look at, let's say, 10 different species working groups and look at their wheels as graphically displayed and say, oh, hey, no, all working groups are sort of not filling in this one particular criteria. So maybe that's something that we as an organization, Road to Recovery, could focus on developing some additional guidance for. Yeah, nobody's doing that. People seem confused about that. Well, that's a good opportunity for us to provide guidance. It would also give us a kind of a higher level look at where progress towards species recovery is across various working groups, and again, what we could focus on, what we could highlight in terms of doing some additional research or developing additional tools to help people move along that particular aspect of the of the progress wheel. The progress wheel is partly the criteria, and I always say, well, it's one thing to look at the wheel, but it's another thing. It's really helpful to look at the actual criteria, because the angels are in the details of those criteria. And so if you read through the 90 criteria, you say, oh yeah, I get it. I see how this is working. And it's a little difficult to grasp that just from looking at the picture. Yet on the other hand, that graphic representation is a really powerful way of showing progress. I mean, if all the wheel is dark blue, that means we've recovered the species, and we've developed strategies for sustaining that recovery as well. So it's like, yeah, Okay, if it's all blue, we're good. If we have all our working groups colored in all blue, yay, we're done.
So let me follow up if I can. I don't see another question. So I'd love to kind of continue this dialogue just a second and maybe get other people to respond to this. You know, our vision, as you described there, and as I, in my mind, Tom, is sort of like the one of my favorite movies, The Field of Dreams, and it's like build it and they will come. You know, trying to, you know, put that resource out there or that tool out there for use and hoping that it will be used. And so far we've seen a couple of groups and teams work and use it, and that's awesome. How do we inspire others to do that going forward so that we can make this more helpful to the greater good, if you will. And that's not only a question for you, Tom, but anybody on the call who is a member of a species working group who hasn't used it to date. So you can start, but I'd love to hear from other people how what would what would tip the scales to your group using it.
How to inspire people to use a tool? Well, I don't even want to try that one, but I think listening to the experience of the Yellow-billed Cuckoo group and also Lesser Yellowlegs did some work with this, and Evening Grosbeak is doing some work with this. I don't know whether they've completed the whole assessment or not yet, but hearing from them and hearing and having others hear that it actually was valuable and in what way would, I hope, inspire others. I think anyone should. I mean, the way this tool is now, it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet format of all 90 criteria, and if you fill it out, it automatically populates the wheel itself with the colors that I described. And there's 3 possible colors. One is we're working on it, 2 is we've done it, and 3 is this is something that we got a grant for, and so that's a color that is reserved for showing that we actually got a grant from you and we worked on this and then we filled it in. I encourage everybody to just download that spreadsheet and play with it. It's secure on the website. You can download it. You can play with it yourself. You can mess it up, and if you mess it up, that's all right. You can just re-download another copy. And it's I think it's just helpful for folks to read through those criteria. I'd like to. I think, yeah, this was useful, and hearing other people say that is the best way to inspire other folks to try it.
Anyone else have a thought about that?
I know Ken Rosenberg does.
You would think. While people are thinking about that, I'd like to ask one more question, Tom, for you. And you mentioned it, and I'm trying to visualize it in my mind. Is it, you know, assuming that we could get 10 or 20 or how many ever teams to begin to use it and to kind of roll them up, if you will, or compare them. Have you thought about any way to do that in an objective way? Obviously, you could have them, the wheels in front of you, but can they be overlaid in some way to give, you know, to have it pop out that this particular segment or portion is needing more work than another on a more global scale?
That's a question for somebody who has more skills in analytics than I do, but we've talked about having the criteria having more specific metrics for each criteria, particularly for some of the ones that lend themselves to objective metrics. And we've talked about doing something similar to, if folks are familiar with the Partners in Flight Species Assessment, where you have, categories, independent categories of vulnerability that are assessed on a score from 1 to 5. We could figure out a way to develop an overall assessment score for progress based on those criteria from 1 to 5. We might be able to do that. I think just the start of a visual display is helpful. I see, Ken, you have your hand up, so I'm interested in anything you have to say here.
Well, you did call on me, Tom, so I'll say something. Um, yeah, I mean, my thoughts have been mostly along the lines of what you were just saying there at the end of the metrics that can come out of this, and this is, I don't know, sort of a dilemma or tension that we've had for many years in bird conservation. I mean, on the one hand, you want to let each group kind of develop things on their own, and we've experienced this with migratory bird joint ventures. We've experienced this with state wildlife plans, and then you get kind of a hodgepodge of great stuff, and some people do it and some people don't. But at some point, I feel pretty strongly that there has to be, I don't know what the right word is. I mean, because you don't want to make this top down, and it shouldn't be thought of as mandatory or oversight, but somebody needs to be tracking the progress overall. And I think that could be the job of the Road to Recovery core team. It could be the job of a group that forms from the working groups, perhaps. But I imagine it's very overwhelming to approach this giant wheel, even if you've got a pretty good group. And it sounds like the Yellow Cuckoo did a lot of work there. And most groups are not going to be in a position to really do this. So we're going to end up with a mixture of partly filled out wheels, fully filled out wheels, and groups but I think it would sort of behoove the whole community to be able to track which species are where, almost like maybe a simplified version of the wheel along the lines of this 1 to 5 scoring, or something even like the pyramid that we used to use, just to simply say where is each species in each group along that progress, so that we can get more resources to have the groups work on it in more detail. So a little bit of a sort of a top-down versus bottom-up tension, but I think somebody within Road to Recovery really needs to be tracking this at a high level.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Any responses to that? I mean, one response I have is, hey, here I am. I'm trying to retire.
Me too.
I don't want to be the keeper of the wheel. And so what is the future of the wheel? And how can we move it forward in a productive way that both achieves the sort of, the flexibility of thinking, but also moves in the direction of enabling our Road to Recovery or whatever to sort of really be able to say this is where we are with bird conservation with more, again, I don't want to use a top-down approach idea, but with more of an oversight idea. Accountability and it's at some level might be very helpful.
So we've got a question on a different topic, but before I read that one, David Yaney did say that they completed the progress wheel for the evening grosbeak and are interested in discussing it and getting feedback on their assessment. So I don't know if David wants to touch on that now, or if you want to we'll be in touch in the near future to do that.
Yay, evening grosbeak working group.
Hey,
Go
yeah, so I just was since you asked Tom, if we had actually finished it, and we did. It took, a little bit different approach probably than Yellow-billed Cuckoo. We're at a different stage, and a lot less of the will is filled out, but we did find like some of the further portions out toward the end stages we had like made some progress in. And we found that it took basically like a smaller group of our larger working group to actually do the exercise. I know you guys had met with us and we got started, but then we had to kind of pull and twist some arms a little bit to get people to sit down and do it. But in the end, it went pretty smoothly and quickly for us, because it was evident like some things, focus areas, we're not there yet, and other things like the migratory connectivity because of all the tagging and tracking efforts we're doing is we're pushing that along farther. We still have some areas to go, some ways to go in like in the social science aspects of it, but we're slowly bringing that in. It would be great to see how, I was wondering if you had started to overlay any of them, but it sounds like we're not at that point yet. But it would be great. It's great to see what the Yellow Bill Cuckoo group has done, and then if we can get feedback from you guys soon, that'd be fantastic.
Well, that sounds like a topic for the species working group series.
Yeah, and the link is on the screen now, and it's also in the chat if you're interested in downloading the wheel. And please send your completed wheels to us at r2rbirds@gmail.com, and so that we can work on that synthesis. We also have a question asking if you've encountered a situation where the wheel tool leads you to conflicting landscape conservation priorities for different species. How have you thought about resolving such conflicting priorities in practice?
Say that question again.
Yeah, have you encountered a situation where the wheel tool leads you to conflicting landscape conservation priorities for different species? How have you thought about resolving such conflicting priorities in practice?
Yeah, I actually don't have a good answer for that, really. I mean, one of the conflicting priorities between sort of biology and the reality of doing conservation can only be resolved by having those social science incorporated into the analysis, so that that's where social science helps us. You know, we're not necessarily good at biologists in resolving those kinds of conflicts, but there are plenty of techniques and plenty of knowledge in the social science world about how to navigate around either, you know, big conflicts or small conflicts in terms of conservation. So I would say the wheel should be helpful in that way, in suggesting kind of some social science actions or research that would be valuable. I also point out that when we developed the wheel, we tried to, even though it's designed to focus on individual species, have that single species approach, there are also elements that really are relevant for landscape approaches to conservation. So there are obviously big threats that can't be addressed by everyone. Threats or landscape challenges that are so widespread and of such geographic scale that no individual species working group could deal with them. And we recognize that. And so there are criteria for how for building relationships with other groups that work on that landscape scale. And I think that's a really important part of all our work. You know, what are the problems or challenges that we can't solve as individuals, but there are groups out there that can work on those things and are working on them. And, you know, how do we sort of leverage that relationship to be more productive for folks just working on a bird?
Yeah, and it seems like potentially if species working groups have completed this wheel, it is a tool for you to have these conversations about potentially different priorities and use that as a jumping off point for to help resolve some of these conflicts. And Paul, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Quinn. And this is an interesting comment. I see it was directed straight to me, but somebody indicated that their McAfee software says that there's a virus in the wheel. And when they try to download the spreadsheet, so it was blocked. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, but I put it out there to others, Tom and Quinn and others who might be able to address that. I don't know. I hadn't experienced that problem in my use of it.
Not with the wheel specifically, but for some people who have tried to download specific PDFs or things, it seems like, especially if you are on a government Wi-Fi or have a specific university firewall, that can interfere. We have had our web developer confirm that there are no viruses on the website. So if you have concerns, there are no viruses, but it may be just a specific computer or network block.
Thank you, Quinn. Thank you very much. And hopefully Melinda finds another way to get the wheel. So thanks.
Yeah, the the Excel spreadsheet uses macros, embedded macros. And so whenever you download it, you have the opportunity to say, turn the macros on or off. Well, if you turn them off, the wheel won't necessarily populate automatically, but you could still look at the criteria and play with the criteria. And so you can do that. You can do that. And I know that some websites, they just don't like Excel macros. They just, or not some websites, some organizations block macro behavior in spreadsheets. So yeah, I think well, I'll check that out. You know, I have McAfee software and I'll see what it says when I try to re-download the wheel. And if there is a bug or something in there, we'll have to figure out, somebody brighter than I will have to figure out how to.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you,
Watch
Quinn.
that.
And thank you for bringing that to our attention, Melinda. I appreciate you on that. Quinn has suggested if you'd like a different way to just email to our email address, that would be awesome. Well, not seeing any more questions. Quinn, do you want to wrap it up and then I'll finish?
Yeah, just want to say thanks again to Tom and the Yellow Bill Cuckoo members who are on the call today, as well as everyone for your awesome questions. I think this has been a really wonderful conversation, and we hope to hear from you again about this wheel so we can answer any questions and yeah, get some more filled out so that we can synthesize some of this information. I think it's really exciting. And that's all I've got. So I'll turn it over to you, Paul, for closing remarks.
Thank you, Quinn, and a big thank you to you, Tom, and the folks who chimed in from the Yellow Bill Cuckoo Working Group and others. So thank you so much for today's webinar. I'll just repeat what we've been talking about. We hope that you do use and try to use the resource, the tool that was created for your use and your benefit, and hopefully collectively all of our benefits, as Ken indicated, in a future effort. So please take a look at that. And we hope you'll join us for future webinars, engagement sessions, forums that we have occasionally. And of course, every so often we have in-person workshops and beginning to think about that next in-person workshop down the road. And a final thing is to thank the Knobloch Family Foundation and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for still continuing to believe in the movement of Road to Recovery and supporting our efforts. So thank you very much all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in a virtual session in the not too distant future. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.